I'm excited to be here. I know of the three that I am the unknown for the most part. And just to give you a little background about myself, I've been serving as a pastor of First Corinthian Church in Harlem. July will be 10 years. I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in a town on Long Island called Freeport. And after Freeport High School, I went on to attend Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as Duke University School of Divinity. My wife and I have been married for over 20 years, and we are blessed to be proud parents of two children who I'm extremely proud of, particularly proud of my son, who is graduating from Morehouse as well this May, but also found out Friday that he got into Duke University School of Divinity as well. So he is definitely following his dad's footsteps. And my daughter is a sophomore at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. And I tell everybody, all of our money is in Atlanta. But I'm grateful for this opportunity. I've been again at First Corinthians for 10 years now. Came there in 2004. When I came in 2004, there were 300 members of the church. Over 9.5 years, that membership has grown from 300 to over 9,000 members. How it has happened? It's happened because we have really sought to engage the community in transformative and empowering ways. It is not church as norm, because for me, part of the reason I became a pastor was to help reimagine what it meant to be church. I could not understand how you could be a faith-based institution and be disconnected from the community. So for me, it is really an oxymoron to be a faith-based institution and not have engagement deep into the community. And so for the 9 years that we've been there, we've been building community and reimagining religious engagement with the community in a different way. And so part of that, as I said before, was really in empowering and transformative ways, really investing ourselves in the community. Now, I get asked often, why are you, a pastor, interested in running for office? And it's a question that I love to answer. Primarily, my interest in running for office did not really start politically. Many years ago when I was a student at Morehouse College and I was taking a class, Religion and Social Policy, I remember my professor raised a question to many of us. He said that those of you who plan on going into the church and going into ministry or even going into public service will one day have an opportunity to engage the public, arena. And he said, and when that moment comes, when that time comes, how will you answer? How will you speak? How will you give voice to concerns of many persons who may be marginalized, people who may be relegated to the margins from this process? And I remember about 22 years ago hearing that and thinking about that actually this past week, because I'm running for many reasons, but one in particular is because I serve a congregation where there are people who feel completely left out of the process. I know what it is to feel that way because I was one of those people who did not really believe in the political process. I was an 80s baby came of age in the 80s, and for me going to Morehouse was about understanding the roots of the civil rights movement and how we struggle. But I also at the same time felt that in many ways politics had missed the mark. That politics was no longer about people. People were no longer interesting for politicians. That people were no longer at the forefront. That campaigns took precedence over community building. That politics took precedence over people. And so for me, for a long time, I was distant and inconsistent with the political process. And then I realized that the only way you can really begin to reimagine this process is to engage it, but in ways that you do not become co-opted by the process, but you help to remake and reimagine what this can look like. This district, the 13th district, that a third of this sits in this area, 717,000 people strong. And yet in the 2012 primary, 43,000 people participated. 6% of the constituency of this district actually participated in the process, which means that there are people who feel disengaged, who feel disconnected, and I think underneath there is a current of people who feel disempowered by the process because no one is connecting dots in ways that would yield transformation and empower people to engage this process. That is one of the reasons I'm running. At the church where I serve, we help people reimagine their lives in community. We help people reimagine what it means to be a vibrant participant in a process that will yield the kind of fruit that I like to call transformative fruit. Because in these days, I think we need conscious-based politics, transformational politics that really seeks to engage communities, engage people in ways that will help them to reimagine themselves. This is the work I've been doing for 9 years. And so when people say to me, why are you going to run for public office? It is because for 10 years I have already been a public servant. For me, this is an expansion of what it means to be a public servant, of what it means to be someone who takes community seriously. I think it was 1941, and Winston Churchill was addressing the Joint House of Congress. And Winston Churchill said words that I read not too long ago, and I heard them. They've stuck to my spirit ever since then. He said that in a democracy, the key to a successful democracy is about learning the art of trusting people. Trusting people in ways so that people understand what it means to be a public servant. And he said, woe unto the public servant who instead of wanting to be a servant wants to be the master of the people and no longer wants to serve the people. In my mind, when you have a district where 6% of the constituents actually engage the process, somewhere along the line, we forgot to trust people. We forgot to trust people as not being numbers that you count or blocks of votes that you can get, but trusting people to believe in this so much so that they can see how transformation can become real by putting their hands to the process again. So for one of the main reasons for me running is about now helping those who have been marginalized and do it in a way that most people say you can't do it. You cannot run for office and empower or educate the electorate at the same time, and I do not believe that is the case. I believe that we can do that, and if we do it in substantive ways, in powerful ways, we can help see this district anew, not with 6%, not with a handful of people selecting who our elected officials will be, but with the people in mass participating in this process. That is democracy, and that is democracy in action. Democracy is not about political nepotism, it is not about cronyism, and it is not about creating a climate where people are afraid to vote their conscience. Democracy is about people believing and letting their beliefs lead the way and how they determine who their elected officials are. I believe that is my man.
Yep.
Good. Excellent. Much more. I'm a preacher, so I can talk all day. Trust me on that. But any questions, I would love.
So,
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a position on some of the issues that are before Congress today? You're welcome to mention any of them, but like gun regulation, women's right to make her own decisions about her reproductive health.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, several issues. I mean, if you go on our website, walrunforcongress.com, there are just some, about 6 that we tackle. But when you talk about issues, for example, the issues that are critical for me right now, not only women's right to choose, because that's important for me, because my wife, we've been married for, again, over 20 years, but I said my son is a senior at Morehouse, which means he was born 2 years before we were married. And I remember when I was preparing for the ministry, and there were some of my colleagues who told me, they said, well, you know, are you going to have the baby? Are you going to keep this child? You all in college. And I remember having a conversation with my wife at the time, was my girlfriend then. And I said to her, I said, well, I have some strong views on this. I said, but at the end of the day, you have the right to decide to do what you want. I want to keep the child. I love it. I'm glad we did. But at the end of the day, I do not think we ought to be in the business of legislating women's bodies, telling them how they ought to make decisions for their own livelihood and sustenance. So that's one issue. Issues that are very passionate for me, education, for example. And right now I'm on Mayor de Blasio's campaign committee for UPK. And also that is important for me, universal pre-K, because the statistics say that a child who does not know how to read by the 2nd grade has a 50% more likely chance of being part of the criminal system if they don't know how to read. And so for me, that is important. And not only that, but then with education, something that's important for me, having just paid off my college loans 2 years ago, was the idea of debt-free college education. There's this idea, a model, a model that is being done in Oregon right now called Pay It Forward. And in Pay It Forward, it talks about states really, those students who want to go to a 4-year or 2-year state school, that it ought to be free. And what do? Well, for 20 years after their graduation, they put 2.5 to 3% of their money back to the state. Why? 2 things. You make education affordable, but also you help people understand how to reinvest in the next generation behind. So those are things that, with regard to education, criminal justice reform is important for me. Immigration reform is important for me. Primarily, I am the first United States-born citizen in my family. My entire family is from the island of Barbados. And so, for me, I would not have the opportunities I had it not been for my parents who came over here. So those issues are important for me. Immigration reform, education, criminal justice reform, affordable housing, issues around the economy and jobs, making sure that people have livable wages. I mean, those are all issues that are important for me.
Hi, I'm from the Riverdale Press.
Yeah.
Yes, the Secretary of Defense today recommended that the size of the U.S. Army be reduced to the size it was just before World War II. How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't know if, when you compare the time between World War II and now, it is radically different. This is a new day where the idea of safety and protecting the citizens is heightened to the nth degree. Right before World War II, we weren't worried about terrorist attacks the way we are now. We weren't worried about protecting our borders the way we are now. But at the same time, while we've seen an expansion in the amount of money we've allocated to our defense, we have also seen where our country has cut funds for people who suffer. So what I would say, I don't know in terms of do we cut back the amount of money we spend on defense to pre-World War II time, but what I do say is that there has to be a kind of healthy balance. That just as we begin to make sure that our army is supplied with what is necessary, that our country is protected, we also have an obligation, I believe, to protect those who are also vulnerable. And it has to be a balance. It cannot be the imbalance we see now with regard to defense spending and spending on human beings and the amount of money we invest in human beings. We've forgotten that. Just why we've seen recently the SNAP cuts, where we've left those who are already vulnerable even more vulnerable now. And so what I would say is that when studies are done to show, compare and contrast what the spending looked like pre-World War II, and then also what was done then, what was at issue then for the defense, versus now, I think then we can make some decisions that may be more realistic given our economy, given the reality of our country, and given what is going on now.
Marianne?
What are your views on gay rights?
Yeah. This is an issue in which I often find myself under attack by many of my colleagues. I am true to form. I am a Baptist preacher. I remember my professor said now he was Baptist born, Baptist bred, and when he died, he was going to be Baptist dead, right? But at the same time, I also am a follower of the teachings of Jesus. The teachings. Now, I say teachings because I think in the church we've gotten some things misconstrued with worship. Why do I say this and why do I bring this up? Because what is at the forefront for me is the affirmation of human dignity, the affirmation of human beings. And what we see is that we see too much divisive engagement, divisive language around who we believe ought to be recognized and validated. When it comes to gay rights, I believe that those persons who are gay have the same rights and access. I support same-sex marriage, again, which gets me in trouble with a lot of my colleagues. And people say, well, how can you, a preacher, how do you support same-sex marriage? They said, this is a moral issue. And I say, no, it is not a moral issue. It is a legal issue. And although there's morality involved for those of us who may not necessarily, those who do not believe in same-sex marriage, at the same time, this is about the rights of people in this country. And if we begin to block the rights and access to people who are part of this country, we are undermining our own democracy in so many ways. And so I'm supportive of gay rights, and I'm a supporter of same-sex marriage.
What do you think of the legislation in Arizona?
Right. It's Arizona. I like that. That's the response is Arizona. Arizona has always been behind, even when it comes to civil rights legislation and so many other things, has been behind. And so I think we have to begin to stop seeking to be so punitive with how we view people and begin to reimagine what it can look like to now empower people in different ways. So that's why I stand with that.
Okay, last question.
Ooh, last question. Well, first I should say that they didn't move the All-Star game, but they can move the Super Bowl next year. My question is this. Do you have a feeling or position with regard to Israel? Do you think the United States has been following the right policy, has been too supportive, not supportive enough? What is your point of view in terms of the Israel-Palestinian issue?
I think historically it has been clear that America has always been an ally to Israel, and Israel has been an ally to America. I think for many the debate is the level of support and how we engage Israel, and do we cut back or do we not support. And I think that for this country, those who have been supportive of us and those who we've had historic relationships with, I think we must continue those relationships, especially when it's beneficial to who we are and our interests overseas. With regard to the issues in Palestine and Israel, I will say this, that I am a believer in peace engagement. I'm not one who supports violence in the sense of how we see the violence being maintained in some quarters in that debate between Palestinian occupation and Israel. So I'm not one who advises that, but at the same time, you've got to almost say that we protect our interests and protect our borders. So I think we must find a way to do that while at the same time reinforcing the need for peace and relationships and not compromise, but the kind of negotiations with people, all who are invested and all who have interests, can see themselves not losing and not compromising, but in some ways sustaining their livelihood and sustaining the way they live. And so with regard to America, I think we continue to be an ally. We continue to support. But I think we have to push other principles as well, and ideas around peace and settlement, and letting people be able to live and finding ways to live without the kind of divisiveness and destructiveness that we've seen over the years. I think that has to be at the forefront of what we do as well.
Thanks. Yeah, given that the Bronx part of the district is a relatively small part of the district, how do you plan to make sure that that the Bronx is not forgotten, and what issues and challenges do you see as unique to the Bronx part of the district?
Well, I think that, one, we're running for the 13th district. For me, there is no part that is not important. I know now that when most electors and most people gear up for campaigns, they look for the places where votes are, where we can get votes, and so that is where the focus becomes. But that would undermine the purpose of my campaign, as I said earlier. This, for me, is about empowering people who have traditionally been marginalized and relegated to the margins in this process. And so for me, in order to do that with any kind of integrity, means that every aspect of this district has to be engaged. We don't start counting numbers. We count people. We believe in people again. We trust people. If people get the information, they begin to learn about what is important, and they find people who not only embody their best interests, but who also see that they are in partnership to see that the things that are important to them find resolution. I think that's how we work. Now, when you start saying the interests of the Bronx, I think there's certain interests in this district that are real for so many people, whether it's in the Bronx, in this portion of the Bronx, northwest portion, which is on the district, or in Central Harlem. Issues around affordable housing, issues around living wages and raising the minimum wage, issues around good access to educational resources. I think the issues are the same. I think sometimes we so dichotomize ourselves and so create these kind of unnecessary disjointedness in districts that we forget that the issues are all the same, and that they're very much not just unique, but have common ground across the board. So,
Thank you, sir.
thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.